Let me just warn you, the story I'm about to share is gruesome. On the day after Christmas in 1862, the United States government executed 38 Dakota men. This is the largest mass hanging in U.S. history. This would take place in Mankato, Minnesota. The Dakota people had been living in Minnesota Territory since time immemorial. Slowly, European settlers would move in and begin to occupy their territories. The U.S. government wanted Dakota land, and they were encouraging Europeans to move westward. Eventually, in 1851, two treaties are signed by the United States government and the Dakota. Under the terms of the treaties, in exchange for land, the United States government was to provide goods and services to the Dakota. But like all treaties, the United States government never fulfills its promises. Things get so bad that the Dakota are on the verge of starvation. All the resources are going to the Civil War, and the treaties are being violated. And to make matters worse, in 1862, there is a crop failure. The Dakota leaders go to the United States government and they ask for what is owed to them, and they're rebuffed. This eventually leads to the 1862 Dakota-U.S. War. It's a brutal settler colonial conflict, and hundreds of people on both sides are killed. The Dakota are led by their leader named Little Crow. Little Crow is a peace chief, but he sees that his people are starving, so he agrees to go along with the war. This conflict rages for about 6 weeks. The war comes to an end at the Battle of Wood Lake. Here, Little Crow and his warriors are defeated. These settlers want revenge. Well over 1,000 Dakota people are rounded up, women, children, and elders. Many are sent to a death camp called Fort Snelling. The Minnesota governor at the time, Alexander Ramsey, calls for the extermination of the Dakota people. This is what he has to say. The Sioux Indians of Minnesota must be exterminated or driven forever beyond the borders of the state. If any shall escape extinction, the wretched remnant must be driven beyond our borders, and our frontier garrisoned with a force sufficient to forever prevent their return. The state of Minnesota also places scalp bounties on all Native Americans, including women and children. Over 300 warriors are tried and convicted of so-called war crimes. Abraham Lincoln decides only to execute 38 of these men. They actually set up the gallows so that when these men are executed, they all die at the same time. In 1865, some 3 years later, 2 additional men are tried, convicted, and also executed. Whatever happened to Little Crow? He returned to his homeland the following year in 1863 and was killed on July 3rd. He was scalped and his body was mutilated. The Minnesota Historical Society put his scalp and his skull on display for decades. Finally, in 1971, his remains were returned to his people. The bodies of the 38 men who were hung were also desecrated. These warriors had their bodies buried in a shallow grave, and later their bodies were dug up and used in medical experiments. Even the famous Dr. William Mayo, the founder of the Mayo Clinic, dug up one of the warriors, filleted its body, boiled down its skull, and used it as a teaching tool for years. The violence doesn't stop there. For months after the war, there's reprisals against the Dakota people. They're mostly driven out of the state of Minnesota. This story is settler colonialism at its worst. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section.